Good evening and welcome to the Sherdog radio recap of UFC on ESPN 30, Barboza versus Chikadze. The main event wrapped up just less than 5 minutes ago. A TKO win for Giga Chikadze over the veteran Edson Barboza. As you may have noticed, if you can see, it's just me flying solo tonight. My usual co-host, Keith Schillen, is out of town, so I'm running this alone. This is going to be the inmates running the asylum. I do see that some comments and questions are already piling up in the chat. I will run down this card from top to bottom, as we usually do, but I'll take as many questions and comments as I possibly can. You guys are running the show. I am at your service this evening. Right off the bat, I'll say that I called the main event pretty much as dead wrong as a human being could. I protested several times during the week that I thought the odds were closer than they should be based on the strength of schedule that both men had faced on their way to this main event. And my call was not just that Barboza was going to win, but probably kind of make it look easy. So that is egg all over my face. Very interesting. Obviously, the speed differential. I was surprised at Chikadze's speed advantage in the first round. Barboza made the necessary adjustments. I really liked the way things were going in the second. The body work was a thing of beauty. He continued to move forward on Chikadze, and to no avail, because in the third round, all it really took was one clean shot. It was that kind of sweeping right hook, and impressive that he landed with that kind of power as Barboza is moving away from him. But that started the ball rolling downhill. We had a bit of an exchange on the ground. It looked like Chikadze was willing to take the sub if it was there for him. It wasn't, but he finished it on the feet just moments later. I haven't seen, because I kind of turned everything off as soon as it was over. I don't know if there was any protest over Herzog's stoppage there. Let me know what you guys think of the stoppage. Was this thing over, or should Barboza have been allowed to try and recover? Should Chikadze have had to finish this thing for real? Let me know what you think about the stoppage in the main event. Austin Ginola in the chat says, Georgia, hottest country for fighters right now. It's certainly up there. I mean, just between him, Giga Chikadze, and Ilia Topuria, they, obviously two of the, well, I can't even really call Chikadze a prospect anymore. He's a contender now. And Topuria, there's Roman Dolidze out there, whose move from 205 to 185 has looked good so far. Friend of the show, Boz, thought the stoppage was fine. I'm good with that. I mean, thoughts. Who should be next for Chikadze? At this point, he's won a pretty much pure striking battle against one of the best pure strikers in the lightweight and featherweight divisions over the last decade. I mean, what do you want to see next from the guy? Are we looking at top 10, if not, on the higher end of the top 10 featherweights for him? What else do you need to see from this guy before you believe he's a title challenger? I'm thinking back to the days when Conor McGregor was on his way up, and people were like, well, he needs to face a really great striker. He needs to face a wrestler. Okay, he needs to face a wrestler who's not on a short camp. Everybody wanted him to jump through one more hurdle. Austin Springer, 2, or realistically Max Holloway. Oh, man. Chikadze versus Holloway, absolutely. Sign me up for it. Take my money right now. Turning for a moment to talk about Barboza, did he lose much in losing? Like, is his stock down that much for you, in your opinion? I still think of Barboza as, I mean, I still think of him as a top 10 talent, a guy that can beat any, given guy on any given night. The routes to victory over Edson Barboza they've been established pretty much since the beginning, but it doesn't mean that they're easy things to do. He's 16-10 in the UFC. It's possible to out wrestle him if you are Jamie Varner and you caught him very, very early in his career, or if you're Khabib Nurmagomedov, or if you're Kevin Lee. It's possible to keep him on his back foot if you're an aggressive enough striker, but it's been harder and harder to do that. That's the way people like Michael Johnson beat him. That's the way Justin Gaethje beat him. But Shane Burgos tried it, and he got trank darted for his troubles. Yeah, still top 15 for sure, says Austin. I'm with you there. Boz says Barboza will never be a champ, and this kind of confirmed it. I agree with you there as well. I didn't think Barboza necessarily needed to drop from lightweight to featherweight. I thought he won the fight against Paul Felder that finally convinced him to move down. But I don't think there's a real easy or even a real feasible path to a title for him in either of those weight classes at this point. He is a great fighter. He's still one of the greatest strikers, I think, in the history of the sport. Just because he lost to Chikadze tonight, that doesn't really change that. Jose Aldo didn't stop being one of the greatest strikers in the sport the night that McGregor knocked him out. Alan McDonald says, Barboza's stock doesn't drop that much. Put him in there with Sadiq Yusuf as a okay, yeah, put him in there with Sadiq Yusuf. I like that. Because the thing about this fight is, I don't know about you watching here, but I was tense. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. It just felt as though either guy could have ended the fight, or at least, sent the momentum swinging very much in one direction at any moment. It was one of the more tense and nervy feeling fights that I can remember in recent memory. Austin Janola says, is he one of the fighters, if not the best, to not fight for a title? He's up there. One of the best never to fight for a title. I mean, I don't want to spend 5 minutes picking through people's records right now for that, but that is a fantastic question. Certainly the names, like the scalps on his trophy case. When you think of how many people he's beaten that either have had title shots or will have title shots at some point, people like Anthony Pettis, Beneil Dariush, Dan Hooker, guys that are hovering around the title pictures in their various divisions, you've got to put him up there. Certainly he's right up there with the best fighters never to fight for a title, assuming he never does. We can come back to this one if we get more questions, more comments. Some people will crash in here a little bit later, I'm sure, after the post-fight press conference, and they usually want to talk about the main event. So we'll come back to that one. Looks like we have our post-fight bonuses. Performance of the night. Giga Chikadze, not surprising. Gerald Meershart, not surprising. We'll get to that one. Abdul Razak Al-Hassan and Pat Sabatini. Those are four extremely deserving individuals. Sounds like Ricky Turcios and Brady Houston will get a bonus off the books, which no surprise there. I mean, that was my fight of the night for sure. Let's talk about these tough finals. The middleweight final, Brian Battle versus Gilbert Urbina. I mean, for those of you checking in for the first time, you're going to be like, why does this guy even have a show? Because I'm going to be running down all the fights that I picked wrong in advance. But I picked Urbina in this one, and I still feel pretty good about it. I still think Urbina might be the better fighter of the two, but ultimately, him stepping up on such short notice, I think it did kind of tell on him. My thought was that even though Urbina had been eliminated on the show and Battle won his way to the final the old-fashioned way, Urbina's problem was that he could be overpowered and out-wrestled. I didn't see that as necessarily something Battle was going to do to him. So I took a little flyer on him as a slight underdog in this one. And I felt really smart for about 3 minutes. Urbina did exactly what you hope and expect a short notice guy that knows he has, a half gallon of gas in the tank is going to do. He went for broke, and he went for broke intelligently. He landed a couple shots, rung him up a little bit, and then flung him to the ground, got dominant position against the fence, and started wailing on him. I halfway into the round, there were a couple times that I thought it was close to being finished, but by the end of that round, Battle had regained his composure. You could tell that Urbina was flagging a little bit in terms of cardio, and even though I still gave Urbina the round 10-9, I felt which way the wind was blowing. Boz saying that he thinks Brian Battle has kind of a high ceiling. I'm not sure I agree, but I will confess right up that Brian Battle, even by the standards of a season of Tough that I basically ignored until I had to start watching tape on these people a week ago, even by the standards of a season like that, I don't have a real good handle on Brian Battle. I'm still kind of looking at him and asking myself what he does at a UFC level, like what he does this was a card full of middleweights at basically every point in the UFC middleweight life cycle, from guys who were fighting for their jobs to guys who were pretty secure and on the way up. What does he do at a level that could threaten any of those guys? I think he's a good grappler, and as we'll get to when we talk about Gerald Meershart, being a tough guy that can take punishment and has an opportunistic submission game can carry you a long way in the UFC middleweight division. I also haven't given up on Urbina. I hope that he gets a shot at a couple more fights in the UFC before they give up on this experiment. One thing I noticed about Tough 29 is how incredibly raw most of this cast is, especially the middleweights, but all of them really. It was something that was happening to Tough anyway as they got later and later into the seasons, where they had kind of scraped out the barrel of just your Forrest Griffins sitting around waiting for a call, but even with a couple of years off, when they came back, there's just a lot of 5-1, 5-2, 6-1 fighters on the show, and a lot of young ones. Battle and Urbina were 26 and 25. Brady Houston is 22. Just guys that are still developing, and we might not know for a little while whether they're really UFC material, let alone contenders. Austin Janola says we can all agree Tresean Gore would most likely have won that fight, and I think pretty quickly. Yes, by all indications from what he did on the show, Gore is kind of the class of the class at this point. I'm definitely excited to see him in the octagon. And middleweight is desperate for new blood. It is, I would say it's where light heavyweight was 5 years ago, but really it's where light heavyweight still is, where anyone who comes in and wins a couple fights and has any kind of spark at all can move into the fringes, at least, of the top 15 really quickly. Tresean Gore absolutely has that kind of potential. The other Tough 29 final. Low audio says St. Trunks 1982. Well, let me pull things up here. Turn up my mic a little bit. Okay, hopefully that's better. The other final, the bantamweight final, Brady Houston and Ricky Turcios. What a hell of a fight. I really enjoyed the fight. I have a little bit of personal bias here. Those who know me know that I'm from Houston. Ricky Turcios is a local guy to me. I followed his career for a long time. I like the dude on a personal level. He's just an absolutely delightful guy to talk to. As all of us know now, something like a cross between early Diego Sanchez and Danny Rojas from Ted Lasso, if any of you watched that show. What I saw in the fight tonight was Tercios, and thank goodness the right person won the fight. At least I think so. Let me know if you scored it for Houston. But it was a clinic in how to win a fight against a better wrestler by forcing him to be on the defensive even when he's in top position. I mean, Houston was something like 6 for 9 on takedowns or something over a round, like over a third of the fight worth of top control. And I still had no problem giving Tercios the first and the third round, because ultimately, if you take a man down and you're in top position, but you're constantly defending yourself against sweeps and submissions, I think you're losing the fight. Like, just being on top doesn't win you the rounds. And Tercios, what an annoying guy that must be to fight. There's just no place to rest, no safe place. Constantly throwing up, like, in I think all 3 rounds, he threw up his legs for triangles that, even if they weren't close to being locked in, forced Houston onto the defensive, and in several cases forced scrambles that allowed Tercios to either sweep or get back up. Okay, so Boz thought Houston won the first 2 rounds. I thought he won just the second, but all 3 close rounds. Austin says Ricky will stay around because he puts on good fights and has a personality people will like. I agree. And with Houston, I think he probably would have been better off getting onto Tough or getting onto the Contender Series a year from now, after maybe 3 or 4 more fights on the regional level. He's just so young and has huge potential. And I say this again as like a guy that I like Ricky Tercios a lot, but Houston might have a higher ceiling. Houston looks and fights more like more of the elite bantamweights in the history of the division. Like, good wrestler plus athlete, good power, and developing striking. Like, that looks a lot more like your Cruzes, your Dillashaws. Tercios definitely will stick around. His fights are all barn burners. He is a hilarious personality, obviously. Yeah, well, Austin agrees with me. If you're being more active on the ground on your back, yeah, you never know. You never know what you're going to get when there's a fight where someone is the superior wrestler. There's, again, over 5 minutes of top control time. You never know what the judges are going to see. Adelaide Bird was in the house tonight, and I believe she was the dissenting scorecard on like 2 of the split decisions tonight. Let me know if there are any other thoughts or questions about Houston and Tercios, but these are 2 guys that I hope both of them end up in the UFC. I expect that Houston's going to get a contract. He's got the connection to the Sick Jitsu guys. He fought great tonight. Again, it was a split decision, and at least some people in the chat, including Boz, who's normally an intelligent guy, thought he won. And then obviously Tercios will be around, at least for a bit. Kevin Lee versus Daniel Rodriguez. This was a depressing fight to me. Depressing because there's some part of me that still sees the potential that Kevin Lee flashed when he first got to the UFC, and still shows in flashes here and there, but it's just not, it's not working. And I don't think it's going to work at welterweight. And that's concerning. Lee, I'll say this. Sometimes he does not fight to his own best advantage. I think the best example may be the second Ally Quinta fight, where he was the bigger, stronger guy, definitely the better wrestler, and instead just really chose to box with a better boxer and lost. Kevin Lee is an excellent wrestler, especially at lightweight. He's a physical powerhouse, again, especially at lightweight. And he is a good striker, but I don't know if he's as good a striker as he thinks he is. But here against Daniel Rodriguez, he employed exactly the game plan that I would have drawn up for him. I mean, obviously nobody is asking me to draw up game plans for UFC fighters, but if anybody had asked me, I'd say, well, throw a lot of kicks and go for the takedown early and often. Even if you don't get them right away, it'll keep Rodriguez honest on the feet. He did that. And for the first round, it worked well. He got an emphatic takedown. His kicks were definitely giving Rodriguez pause. Rodriguez wanted to box. Lee's kicks just sort of kept him from getting into his comfortable punching range. The problem is that about halfway through the second round, Lee started to get tired. And the takedowns that he was getting before weren't coming anymore. He wasn't kicking as often. Generally, when someone starts to get tired, well, the two big exertions are shooting for takedowns are extremely tiring. It's why so many wrestlers get strikeritis, and they stop kicking as much. Just it takes, a lot of energy to kick. Once he stopped doing those things, the momentum was all Rodriguez. Great performance by Rodriguez. Just the fact that he stepped up on 10 days notice, 12 days notice, and he beat someone as good as Kevin Lee with pace and cardio, that's extremely impressive. I underestimated Rodriguez when he came to the UFC, but honestly, he's looked fantastic. I did pick him in this fight. I've finally come around on the Daniel Rodriguez. I'm on the Daniel Rodriguez train cautiously, but great performance by Daniel Rodriguez. Disappointing performance by Kevin Lee because, again, I thought for the most part he did the right things. He didn't go out there and beat himself, but whether it's just because the things that made him so promising at lightweight don't work on UFC welterweights, or because those multiple knee surgeries have taken something out of him, it's pretty, I mean, that's pretty sad. Just Kevin Lee is still only 28 years old. He came to the UFC. It feels like he's been in the UFC for 10 years, but obviously, he hasn't, but it feels like it. And it's hard to believe he's still only 28 years old. Yeah. High or low 1,000 in the chat says D-Rob was pretty tired in the third. I agree. He was definitely tired, but he won the third. I thought unequivocally, he was tired, but he threw more strikes than Lee. He landed more strikes than Lee, and Lee couldn't get him down. So, though he may have been tired, he had enough gas, that it won him the fight. Because if he'd lost that round, at least on my books, he would have lost the fight. I don't know what's next for Kevin Lee. It reminds me a little bit of Kelvin Gastelum, where it's hard to say where his home is in terms of weight. The things that made him really, really impressive at 155 just haven't carried over to the 170-pound division yet. But I don't know if he can make 155 on any kind of regular basis. Alan McDonald says, again, Rodriguez defies expectations. Crazy. Yeah. Not much to say other than that. And Austin says that Rodriguez, he thinks he is the real deal. I agree. I will say I was a little concerned at, I won't say Rodriguez looked hapless on the ground in the first round, but he really didn't have much for Lee on the ground until Lee got visibly tired. So that's something else that he'll need to be tested. But, for a guy that's probably going to be looking at a top 15-ish fighter next time out, he's earned the chance to prove it. Okay, yeah, one last thing on this. They kept saying he's filled up to be a real welterweight. I heard them say that. They said that repeatedly. I think that's a narrative. I mean, you look at him at 170 and look at him at 155. He doesn't look that different to me. I don't feel as though he's put on 15 pounds of muscle mass compared to how he looked in, the Gillespie fight. Put him up against a good wrestler. Let's see what he does. Austin, I don't know if you're talking about Rodriguez or Lee, but Lee's last fight at welterweight was against Rafael dos Anjos, who is kind of in the same boat as Lee, where he's a grindy, almost unstoppable wrestler at lightweight, and it just doesn't work quite as well at welterweight. But yeah. And Kyle Lawheed, welcome to the chat, says, I think Kevin needs 2 more fights at 170 before we write off his welterweight campaign. Oh, I would guess that all the rest of his UFC fights are coming at 170. Like, I'm not writing him off as a UFC level welterweight. I'm just writing him off probably as a top 10 contender at welterweight. But I'm open to being proven wrong on that regard as well. Just, but yeah, like, give him a couple more fights before we write off the campaign. Yeah, absolutely. And he'll get at least a couple more. He's young. He's young. He has a ton of personality. His fights are generally good. I don't think he's going anywhere. We're going to be talking about Sam Alvey here in a minute. If Sam Alvey can get like a 7-fight winless streak worth of rope, I think Kevin Lee has a little while before he has to worry about the pink slip. Let's talk about the other tough 29 fight on the card. It would be Andre Petrovsky versus Michael Gilmore. This one, nice to give Petrovsky a showcase. I have the feeling that this fight happened on this card because of Gilmore's story, just with what he did. And if you don't know, if you didn't follow the season, join the other 100% of the human race. Nobody watched this season. But Gilmore was told he was an alternate and just basically was an unofficial alternate. He quit his day job, stayed in Vegas, stayed in shape, and hoped to get the call. He did end up getting in the call, and they did like a little stand-up with Dana White where Dana was like, I love your fucking attitude. And of course you love his fucking attitude. He stayed in Vegas on his own dime to be on your show. Of course you love that. Anyway, I think they rewarded him with an actual UFC fight based in some ways on that. Unfortunately, the fight itself, he did a good job of surviving. It looked like I figured it would for the first round. Petrovsky was going to have enormous advantages in speed, strength, wrestling technique. Petrovsky's on the show, his striking was shown to be rudimentary. At this point in his development, Petrovsky's striking is pretty much just a means to an end to get him from the opposite side of the cage to close enough to either shoot a double leg or just run you into the fence and go for a takedown from there. But I figured it would be good enough to tee off on Gilmore. And for the first round, I mean, he was throwing them all over the place. I saw a few people on Twitter, talking about Gilmore, like, actually winning the second round. I don't know what those people were watching. I think it may just be that inverted expectations thing where a guy spends one round getting his ass completely kicked, and when he gets his ass less kicked the second round or the next round, then you're like, oh, well, like, he won that one. Good on Gilmore to make it as far as he did. I figured he was actually going to make it to the final bell. Hooray, moral victory. But Petrovsky, as raw as his striking is, I was impressed with his finishing instincts on the ground. He just got in real close on him, started dropping those elbows, and just kept doing it until the ref stopped. It was the perfect way to finish that fight. He didn't try to get creative. He didn't hit him with 5 elbows and say, oh, it isn't working, let me go for a choke or something. He just kept smashing him until he either tapped the mat or the referee pulled him off. Turns out Jason Herzog pulled him off, and there you go, Andre Petrovsky. Welcome to the UFC. He's a little old to have as few fights as he does and to have kind of as rudimentary a game as he does. But again, this is middleweight. It's desperate for new blood. He has one skill at an elite level right now. He's just right now, right out of the box, he's one of the better pure wrestlers in the middleweight division. So that's all you really need. I don't know if Gilmore will get another shot. I suspect he'll probably get another fight. The UFC would love nothing better than... they would love nothing better than for his story to be told a few more times. And hell, if he wins a couple fights in the UFC, all of a sudden he's an example to other fighters. Hey, if you throw your entire life on the bonfire, maybe you can get in the UFC through tough. Who knows? All right. That gets us out of the tough fights. We stay in the middleweight division. And was this the main card opener? Mahmoud Muradov versus Gerald Meershart. I was absolutely right about this fight for the first round or so. The difference in Muradov's hand speed and power and just the crispness of his striking was jaw-dropping. He was just touching Meershart up at will. Halfway through the first round, I thought we were on our way. Well, actually, let me run that back. A minute into the fight, I thought this thing is going to be over in 2 minutes. Then halfway into the first round, I thought, oh, this is a 10-8 round. And by the end of the round, it was a 10-9 round, and the momentum was arguably moving in Meershart's direction. High or low 1000 in the chat asks about how about GM3 and the groin and eye poke inadvertent. It takes a lot for me to call a foul like just flagrant and intentional. I think most fouls are negligent. You know, nobody goes, except for fence grabs. Fence grabs are always intentional. But groin shots and eye pokes, they're usually negligent. I'm all for points being taken. I'm all for points being taken more quickly than they are now generally. But it's because a fighter would not close his hand or just, was kicking in the danger zone too many times and was warned. So I don't know if it was inadvertent, but maybe he didn't care so much if he ended up getting DQ'd. That's something. I mean, I still think Greg Hardy, hit the one guy with the illegal knee in the head because he was gassing out and would rather lose by DQ than just gas out and lose the honest way. But Boz in the chat has been mentioning that Mahmoud Muradov had an adult film career. I did not know that. I don't know if that enriches my life to know, but I guess he has that to fall back on. I'm more interested in, Gerald Meershart. You look at his UFC career, and he is surprisingly accomplished. There are really no bad losses. Like, the only people he's lost to in the UFC are very good fighters. And conversely, most of the people that he's beaten aren't the best of the best. I mean, his win over Trevin Giles is continuing to age very well. And I have the feeling that Muradov will bounce back from this and that this win will age very well for Meershart as well. But he keeps racking them up. There's something to be said, again, for being that tough and having that opportunistic a submission game. But it almost discredits him to say that that's all he is. The impressive thing to me, or an impressive thing, is despite the stark advantage in speed that Muradov had over Meershart, by the second round, Meershart was landing on the feet. He was finding ways to land flush shots. And that's extremely impressive. And conversely, Muradov hit Meershart with, in the first round alone, probably 5 or 6 just flush overhand kill shots. And Meershart was hurt and rocked, but either he has an even better beard on him than we thought, or Muradov's power is a little overrated. Jury's still out on that one. Muradov is going to get plenty more fights. He was probably on his way to a ranked fighter after this if he won. He's not, but, we're going to see him against somebody again within the next 3 or 4 months. And meanwhile, Meershart just keeps plugging along. I think he's, goodness, I want to say he's like 11-6 or something in the UFC right now. Just a guy that he's always better than I think he is when I see him fight, and always better than I think he is, or more accomplished than I think he is when I look back at his record and look back at his old fights when I'm, doing tape study for an upcoming fight. One of these times, I'm gonna pick a Gerald Meershart fight correctly. Speaking of fights that I did not pick correctly, Abdul Razak Al-Hassan versus Alessio Dakirico. I'm not a huge believer in Dakirico either. I was kind of surprised he wasn't cut off of his his 3-fight losing streak, but he came back, knocked out Joaquin Buckley with that head kick. I figured he'd be too much for Abdul Razak Al-Hassan at 185. Just Al-Hassan at this point, he has a couple of extremely dangerous tools, but he'd proven that he couldn't make them work on a consistent level on UFC quality fighters. Add in that he had horrible problems making weight at 170, so he moves up to 185, and he is a very short 185 pounder. All that out the window, as Al-Hassan, I'm pretty sure it was the first strike of the fight. Just Al-Hassan throws a right high kick. Dakirico is ducking into it, guard a little bit too low, and shin to chin, Dakirico is dead. His mouthpiece goes flying. Alan McDonald says you're surprised that Al-Hassan wasn't cut after losing to Jacob Malkoun. I'm absolutely with you. It wouldn't have been completely out of character for the UFC to cut him after 2020, where he went 0-2. He missed weight both times. Honestly, the UFC has less patience with missing weight than with losing. You could lose 3 fights in a row in the UFC and stay on roster. Well, QED, look at these two guys. You can't miss weight 3 times in a row and stay on roster, like even if you're a championship level fighter. So yeah, I was surprised they didn't cut him before the Malkoun fight, let alone after, because yeah, he moved up to 185, but he got absolutely tooled. Malkoun whooped him. There was a 10-8 round in there, but he gets the chance and makes the most of it. Abdul Razak Al-Hassan, a knockout of the year contender, for one thing. Let me know where that falls on your knockout of the year list. And here, just a quick plug for last night, Emily Ducote and Danielle Taylor at Invicta, whatever the number is. Emily Ducote, probably front runner for knockout of the year. Just brutal. So go find it on Twitter. I don't know if Dakirico is going to get another shot here. I do think he's probably the first fighter in UFC history to win and then lose consecutive fights by first round head kick knockout, but don't quote me on that yet. We'll put Sherdog associate editor Jay Petrie, the stat man, on it. Okay, well, that was a 17-second fight, and we just talked about it for about 3 minutes. So let's move on down. Sam Alvey versus Wellington Turman. This fight sucked. Sam Alvey fights can be painful to watch. It was funny to listen to the UFC booth talking about it, where at least Bisping, and I think probably Bisping and Felder both, were saying, well, if Sam Alvey, if he went first, if he moved forward, if he threw the jab. Sam Alvey has 21 fights in the UFC. Have you seen none of them? Sam Alvey does not go first. That's not what he does. Win or lose, he is the ultimate wait counter striker. Boz says, I hated this fight so much. Every right thinking person hated this fight. I don't think Turman liked this fight, and he won and probably kept his job by winning. And I don't think he liked this fight. It was terrible. And the fouls. So for those who didn't watch the prelims, Wellington Turman was deducted 2 points in the third round for what felt like his third and fourth eye pokes on Alvey, but they were probably 40 seconds of actual cage clock time apart, and I am 100% A-okay with it. Turman poked Alvey in the eyes like 4 times. All of them were just the classic reaching forward with the sweeping extended fingers thing, where somebody asked before if Meershart's fouls were inadvertent. I'm like, past a certain point of negligence, it's indistinguishable Or more to the point, it doesn't matter whether it was on purpose. If you're that negligent, then it might as well be on purpose. Yeah, it was terrible. The less said about this fight, the better. I will say this. It was a split decision, and I do think the right person won. I actually thought Turman won all 3 rounds. And Boz says, yeah, Alvey lost his shit after the scores were announced, just stomped around the cage, yelling at the judges. I've covered a Sam Alvey fight from press row. For a guy he has the persona of the, I'm the smiling guy, I'm the quirky guy. I walk into the train song. I've got my wife who was the model who was also came from a reality show. He is grouchy in all these losses. He is always mad at the judges or mad at the referee. Just every single time. There's always something. Yeah, it wasn't a good look for anybody involved, really. Again, Turman won the fight. I thought he won all 3 rounds, but he wins the Maximo Blanco award from me for 2021 for a guy who not just committed fouls, but committed fouls that made me go, do you even know the rules of this sport? Congratulations, Wellington Turman. Dustin Jacoby versus Darren Stewart. Good look for Jacoby. He's always going to be, I won't say a one-dimensional fighter. He's not a one-dimensional fighter, but he is a specialist. He's sunk too much of his life into being a kickboxer. He was a kickboxer who had trouble on the ground 5 years ago. He lost 2 fights in the UFC back in like 2012, 2013. He bounced around some other promotions. He went to World Series of Fighting, lost to David Branch there, and then he lost to King Mo and John Salter in Bellator. His problem all those times that he couldn't stay on his feet. Comes back to the UFC after 4 years in Glory Kickboxing. I think he was a ranked fighter. He fought for a title. He was a very good kickboxer, but he's been a more complete fighter since he's been back. You wouldn't think that spending 4 years doing kickboxing would shore up the other parts of your game, but they somehow have for Dustin Jacoby. Darren Stewart wisely tried to get this thing to the ground. He did briefly, but couldn't keep him down. The thing about Dustin Jacoby is he can be taken down. I mean, he's a long-legged guy who throws a lot of kicks, and he's a striker by trade. But he's always had, since he's been back, he's had a good get-up game. That was in evidence against Stewart. And once they were back on the feet, I mean, Jacoby, thrashed him. I was kind of throwing my hands up about the stoppage when I first saw it because I was looking at it out of the corner of my eye while I was typing something. I looked at the replay. I'm like, oh, okay, no, Stewart didn't know what planet he was on. Good stuff from Dustin Jacoby. Nice. Another first round TKO. For Stewart, he's had a rough run of late at 185 as well as 205. He had the pointless Eric Anders rematch at 205, decided he liked the taste of food, so he's staying at 205. As far as I'm concerned, he can stay at 205. His problem isn't that he's not big enough for light heavyweight. It's just that he's not winning. I guess we'll see what happens next. JJ Aldridge versus Vanessa Demopolis. Coming into this one, it took me a long time to get on board with flyweight JJ Aldridge. I had kind of written her off early on as a strawweight. She didn't present as a plus athlete, not very strong, not physically imposing. And when she moved up to flyweight, I thought, well, that's not going to get better. And I think I've picked against her in her last 3 fights leading up to this one. I did pick her to beat Demopolis. Demopolis is just way too small. I mean, if you come into the octagon and by comparison you make JJ Aldridge seem just impossibly big and hard to deal with physically, and you make it seem like she has the reach of KB Buller, then you've made a poor life choice at some point along the way. I don't know if Demopolis has a future in the UFC, but if she has any, it's probably at strawweight. She has to be. And again, hat tip to Jay Petrie for pointing this out. She might be the only fighter in UFC history, or at least the only other one than Rin Nakai with shorter than a 60-inch reach. Just, she's not big enough to get inside on UFC flyweights. Considering that she freely admits that her grappling is her best skill set, she needs to be at strawweight. I guess we'll see what happens there. But Aldridge survives and advances. She actually looked really good. I thought she was better everywhere. Even when they went to the ground, Aldridge was just positionally sound, obviously bigger and stronger. The UFC booth was criticizing Aldridge a little bit for not pushing harder to win or to finish the fight in the third round. It's women's flyweight. What do you want? Like, look at the finish rates. Like, she dominated. She won all 3 rounds. She pretty much won every minute of every round. Good job, JJ Aldridge. Yeah, Alan McDonald says JJ Aldridge definitely has one of the biggest technique to athleticism ratios in the UFC. I agree, but she still only has the second greatest ratio even in her own division because she works in the same division as Roxanne Modafferi. There, they should make that fight. Second fight in, Jamal Emmers versus Pat Sabatini. Man, I don't know Jamal Emmers personally, but I imagine he is kicking things in his hotel room right now. He had this fight in the bag. He hurt him with that uppercut, jumps on him, takes Sabatini's back. He's working for the choke. Sabatini grabs a leg lock, and Emmers counters with a leg lock. And obviously the UFC booth broke it down pretty well from there, but Emmers had a toe hold while Sabatini had a heel hook. A toe hold hurts. A heel hook will rip all your ligaments and tendons off. And honestly, it sounded bad. I hope Emmers is okay. And again, with his good leg, I'm sure he's kicking things in his hotel room, because there were definitely some moments there where even when Sabatini was going for the leg, where Emmers could have pulled his leg out, stood up, and just made Sabatini get back up. And at the very least, you're a minute into the round and you're on your way to a 10-8 round. So, you live, you learn. Again, we're talking about a guy in Emmers that gave Giga Chikadze all he could handle just over a year ago. He has all the potential in the world. Meanwhile, great win for Pat Sabatini. He obviously was upset about it. Nobody likes to, except for maybe like psychos, like, Huzamor Palhares, don't like to hurt their opponent. Sabatini was distraught. So, I mean, good to see, but, great performance by Sabatini. Oh, man. The higher low 1000 says Emmers' kneecap was floating down by his shin. I'm just glad they found it. The opener, Leomano Martinez versus Guido Canetti. Martinez is someone who, like Ricky Tercios, is local to me. I know him. I would flatter myself that I know him pretty well. I've been high on him as a prospect since he was like 4-1 as a pro. And he won his UFC debut. He was heavily favored to do so. Missed weight badly. For those who don't know the backstory on this, Leomano Martinez's head coach, Saul Solis, the head coach of Metro Fight Club here in Houston, former head of Team Punishment, which of course, Tito Ortiz back in the day was a head coach of Chris Cyborg for a while. He passed away from COVID like a week ago, or, a little over a week ago at this point. Martinez was actually supposed to fight last week. He was held off that card for his own safety in case he came up positive for COVID. But, I mean, obviously the most difficult circumstances imaginable to have your UFC debut. You don't excuse someone for missing weight, and he wouldn't want me to excuse him, I'm sure. But I am happy that he just survived, beat a guy he was supposed to beat, and will get a chance to put this behind him and show what he can really do in the UFC. As I say, I've been high on him as a prospect for a while. He looks like kind of a tall, skinny, gangly guy, but he brings a level of knockout power that is really rare at bantamweight. And if you haven't seen him yet, or all you've seen is tonight and his loss on Dana White's Contender Series last fall, you're in for a treat. High or Low asks, what did Mana weigh in at? He weighed in at 140. He needed to make 136. So he blew weight by 4 pounds. He gave up, I believe, 25 or 30% of his purse to Canetti. And hey, good on Canetti for taking the fight. And good on Canetti for bringing it to a split decision. I mean, leaving aside the weight miss, leaving aside whatever, lack of top gear conditioning that he might have had due to what the last couple of weeks of his life have been like, Martinez just flat out didn't pull the trigger. Canetti was tailor-made for Mana Martinez to knock out in 3 minutes. Canetti is, even though he's from Argentina, he's what Jay Petrie would call a Boston-style face-first striker. That is somebody that's Mana Martinez is just built to snipe. But he never really did. It was hard for him to get untracked, through single strikes pretty much the whole fight. Canetti was able to get inside on him pretty easily just by charging forward, which normally that doesn't happen to him. So I don't know if Canetti will get another fight in the UFC. I think that makes him 2-5 in the UFC. But I'm just relieved that Mana will get another chance to show what he can do under more optimal circumstances. There you go. That is all 12 fights from UFC Vegas 35, UFC on ESPN 30. I've been running this solo. It is unaccustomed. My voice is close to giving out. But let's get to what Keith Schillen would call the fun stuff. Starting with the cut list. These are fighters that I don't even have to get anyone to agree with me. Nobody has to second this. Who I think should be cut. And it's not meant to sound mean. There are 600 fighters on UFC roster. There are new prospects coming up all the time. The only way to make room for them is for some fighters to get cut after their fights. That's the circle of life. Here comes the cut list. It's going to be a pretty big one. Guido Canetti, not on the cut list. If Martinez had made weight and had won, Canetti's gone. But considering that Canetti more or less did the UFC a solid just by taking the fight with a guy who was severely overweight, I would imagine he gets another chance. I think Sam Alvey and Wellington Turman should both be cut, frankly. I'll just put that out there. It's not very often that a winning fighter makes it onto the cut list, but for Alvey, that's pretty obvious. He's now 0-6-1 in his last 7, and even if that one draw against Da Un Jung, I thought should have been a win for him. If he were 1-6 in his last 7, I'd say he should probably be cut. He's looked equally ineffectual at middleweight and light heavyweight. So, he's a guy who just isn't winning fights anymore at either weight class. I think he's gone about as far as having the name recognition and the persona can carry him. Same for Turman. Turman at this point, he's 2-3 in the UFC. The people he's beaten are Marcus Perez, who's washed out of the UFC, and Sam Alvey, who by all rights should be washing out of the UFC right now. He has time that he could come back. He's still only 25 years old, but even tonight, he barely beat Sam Alvey and just fouled the living bejesus out of him. Get both these guys out of the UFC. None of the tough guys, even Gilmore, should get another chance here. So that's it. Your cut list is Wellington, Turman, and Sam Alvey. Alan McDonald says, you sure you don't want to give Alvey another chance? Oh, my goodness. I mean, it would be funny just to see how he reacts if he loses another one. Like if he gets mad enough, will he actually just turn red from head to toe? Like, will he explode? I don't know. But at this point, even 185 and 205, and believe me, part of the reason he's still in the UFC is that he works in two divisions where there aren't people lining up to take his place. But even there, like, I think he's got to go. And I know you were joking, Alan, and I probably shouldn't have taken that quite as seriously. Bulls and Bears. Stock market reference. Bulls, things whose stock is up. They can be people, they can be groups, they can be concepts. And Bears, the opposite. People, places, things whose stock is down. I don't know if I'll have three of each, but Bulls. Yeah, the Alvey tantrum was epic. High or low 1,000. The biggest bull is Giga Chikadze. I mean, he faced what was on paper easily the stiffest test of his career. I mean, he'd never fought anyone even within like sniffing distance of the rankings. Here he steps in against a top 10 guy who's faced much better competition and has the same general specialization as he does, and he whooped him. Finished him. Like, great job, Giga Chikadze. He's been full of hyperbole about his own qualifications, about his own skills, but it's hard to deny him right now. Like, if somebody wants to prove he's not the best striker in the division, if not the sport, it's kind of on them to come and show us now. Gerald Meershart. Again, he was the biggest underdog on the card, even a bigger underdog than like Michael Gilmore was. And Michael Gilmore was there basically as a story. And Meershart won, and he won decisively. Got another finish. You got to love that. And number 3, the city of Houston, my hometown. Ricky Tercios, Mana Martinez, both won. You know, always good to have the local guys win. Nice to see UFC welterweight Alex Morono putting the black belt on Ricky after that well-deserved victory. So that makes me happy. You know, their gym, Gracie Baja Woodlands, is, well, certainly the closest gym to my home that has any UFC fighters in it. But yeah, like they're like 10 minutes away. Bears, things that are on their way down. Whew. Sam Alvey. You know, this was a winnable fight. He was just barely an underdog here. And I'm not going to join the UFC booth in clamoring for him to change his entire approach to fighting in the space of 15 minutes. Like, he's not going to go first, but he could have done more. And, you know, a bummer that he loses on the back of like a bunch of fouls. But if not for those, he probably would have just lost all 3 rounds in kind of prosaic fashion, and he'd be just as out of the UFC. Biggest bear? For me, it's got to be Kevin Lee. It's not Edson Barboza. Like, as we kind of said off the top, and most of you seem to agree, I think of Barboza about the same as I did before. I came away from their fight higher on Chikadze rather than down on Barboza. But Kevin Lee, I had hope for Kevin Lee that this was the fight where he was going to show that, hey, he could make a run as a contender at welterweight. I've been told here in the chat that he needs a couple more fights before we can write off the whole welterweight experiment. I'm willing to stipulate to that, but the initial returns were not promising. And yeah, that's that's unfortunate. He's a guy that has all the potential in the world. He's just 28, and just a few lapses in fight IQ and some injuries have really kept him from reaching his ceiling. Overall letter grade for the card? C+. I mean, it had 3 tough fights, and I only cared about one of those because I knew one of the fighters in it. Other than that, it's, some guys I vaguely have heard of out of a season of Tough that I didn't watch. There were a couple of crummy, split decisions and 2 really good fights. I'll give that one a C. There you have it. The UFC on ESPN 30 live recap show is done. I have been your host, Sherdog.com senior editor Ben Duffy. We'll be back. I should be back with Keith in the co-pilot's chair. This coming Thursday will be the preview for, what is the next card even called? Okay, yeah, it's not UFC on ESPN. This is UFC Fight Night Brunson versus Till, with a ton of European talent on it, and we'll have a full preview for that one. We'll break down all 11 currently scheduled fights with picks and predictions. If you've never listened to our preview, I'm more of the one-liners and narrative guy. Keith is the X's and O's guy. So if you like the analyst type stuff, make sure to check in for that. And then he and I should be back next Saturday night for the recap of that one. In the meanwhile, thank you so much, everybody in the chat, for making this a live one. You guys have been the greatest co-host ever, especially, longtime friends of the show like Alan McDonald, like Boz, some, I believe, newcomers, Austin Janola, Higher Low 1000. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you'll come back around next Saturday night. Until then, thanks for watching, and enjoy your week.